Hi, it's so lovely to hear people telling stories in such a lively way. Varies from night to night. You obviously seem very alive, which is great. Suck up. I know. Listen, when people start storytelling sessions, and this is a tradition going back many, many hundreds of years, just to open the session and to make sure that everyone's there and ready for the story. Storytellers have always said something and then there's been a response. That was because it meant that people were ready, and also if you're capable of response, you're responsible. So this is one, it just goes crick, crack. Crick, I say crick, you say crack. Crick, crack. Crick, crack. Crick, crack. Oh, everyone's up for it. Now, tell a story. Tell a story. Tell a story. Tell a story. There we are. That's the warm-up. You can all go home now. There's one that I've picked up since I've been here, and it's a very touching local one, which some of you may know, but I'm not sure how many. And it's to introduce a story, or if you're in the middle of a story, to change the subject, or it's used for many, many different things. There's a conjunction, if you like. It goes like this. You'll join me in it. What about them Blue Jays? Welcome. A lively beginning, because you sounded so lively to begin with. This is a welcome to the forest. What's left of it. There was once a storyteller who was also a healer, and that applies to so many storytellers, that they are aware of the healing effect of their story. And that reminds me that over there, a great storyteller, Anton Pavlovich Chekhov, has a play on at the moment called The Cherry Orchard, also about the fact that trees have been cut down. And we will be hearing some horse noises at some point, so we're using two sound effects, one sound effect for two shows. Allow that just to let the things travel along. Once the healer storyteller, travelling around telling his stories in company, was approached by Death. And Death said, I have a bargain for you. I have a deal. What I'm suggesting is that I will stand at the head of the bed if your patient is going to die. And I will stand at the foot of the bed if the patient is going to survive. This was important for Death because it meant that he could tell stories of comfort to the patient about to die. Stories to prepare that person for that inevitable eventuality. If the patient was going to live, well, there are other terrifying eventualities to face in life. Lots of suddenlies, lots of choices, lots of sudden lies, many things. And so it appealed to the storyteller, to the healer, to make this bargain. And his fame spread, so much so that the king came and said, if you can cure my daughter, the princess, I will give you her hand in marriage, half the kingdom, and many riches. Well, there wasn't anything in the bargain with Death about cure. But still, the storyteller, the healer, went into the princess's room, where she was lying ill. And the moment they met, of course, they fell in love. And he began, yes. And they began to tell each other stories. And it was a while since they were so engrossed in telling each other their story. It was a while before he noticed that Death was standing at the head of the bed. The princess was to die. And now he started to tell his stories for all he was worth. She was even more enchanted. Death himself was enthralled. And in the middle of the story, while Death was enchanted, the storyteller healer turned the bed around. So So she got better and they got married. But that wasn't the end of it, of course, because at the wedding, Death came and took him aside, the bridegroom now, the storyteller, and said, "Excuse me, you tricked me." And the storyteller said, but for a story to go on, most of the time you need disobedience. As well as responsibility, you need disobedience. "Nevertheless," said Death, "and even so, if you need responsibility, then you have to accept your responsibility, and this is what it means." And he took him to a room, and in that room there were many, many lamps. Each lamp represented the life of a human being on the earth. And the amount of oil in the lamp represented how much that person had still to live. And Death showed the storyteller, the healer, his lamp, and there was a few minutes of oil, and that was it. When someone is about to die, the story that person tells is compelling, at the very least. The storyteller now was telling his story to Death. Guests were arriving from other parts of the wedding, looking for the storyteller because they knew that where he was, something exciting was bound to happen. And so they gathered round, and pretty soon, all of them were listening to his story. And it took some time. It took considerably longer, and no one noticed that it had. It took a lot longer than the oil that was available. Some late guests arrived. They too came to listen to the story. Finally, when he'd finished, Death said, "You have been given attention. Attention is the same as love. These people, by listening to you, have made the oil in your lamp increase, and it is possible that the oil in their lamps has increased. The important thing, though, is that you accept that responsibility, both for the first deed you did, which was to turn the bed around, and also now, if you're telling a story to 10 people, and that story takes 10 minutes, that's 100 minutes of life you're taking up, so use it well." And with that advice, the storyteller went off. Near his horse's going. Off he went. Now, he may be alive still, for all we know. Except, as the Greek storytellers tell us, to expect a flower to bloom forever is an insult to the flower. All I know is that that story is true. It is. Do you know how I know? I heard it from a storyteller, who 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 heard it from that one. It's very good, as I've said at least twice now, to meet people who are this relaxed. The notion relax, I read today, means without discipline, lax. It doesn't mean unruly, it just means not too formal, which is great. Because when we came into this space, we thought it was rather forbidding. So we called upon a great designer to brighten it up, and that's the result. That is the work of the Kew Beach Daycare Centre, average age 6 to 8. And the instruction was 0. There were no instructions. No adult help, no adult advice, just do something about stories. So there you are. Stories are needed by us. It's a fundamental need. We need stories as fundamentally as we need food, as we need land, as we need water, fire, love, or air. The last two things I did when my father was dying were first of all, to tell him stories, and then, vainly as it happened, to try to breathe life into him. Stories, like breath, can sustain life. Breath can also be used to speak words of love. Recently I heard a story of a woman who went up into her attic. It's a kind of a story which I can't explain, but people who've been to see the show before have said that it really stays with them. She went up to her attic and she was clearing up the effects of a lifetime. Her husband had recently died. She looked to the corner And in amongst all the other things that made up the story of his life was a balloon. She suddenly realized that the balloon was still filled with her late husband's breath. Use breath to sustain life, as I've said, to speak words of love, to blow things up, to scream, although that's not a sound that we hear that often live anymore. I mean, there are exceptions. One is those really caring, sharing husbands who are there when the baby's born. But you know what I mean. It seems as if people die somewhere else. There never was a room in a house in which someone hadn't died in the old days. Now people go away somewhere to die. Slaughter happens somewhere else, slaughter of animals and of people. We can also use breath to have an argument, which is the next bit that I want to tell you about, and this is a bit of an encounter group section of the show. I had a fight with my girlfriend, is what I'm trying to say. What do you call your girlfriend or your partner if you're not married? This is something that I've been asking people. Apparently, locally people say, my significant other. That's one thing that people say. Or somebody recently called me and said that he called his partner my pelvic affiliate, which I thought one in the army I heard, which was my person of opposite sex sharing loo quarters, my prostitute, the army one. Might not to be to everyone's taste. And then, well, my next of skin. I had an argument with my next of skin. Now, we both work in the media. We're both in the theatre and sometimes in other media. Incidentally, those of you who are concerned about that, it's not for any program or anything like that. It's just Andy is the director, and we're making a record of the show. Please don't put you off. Having said that, I suppose everyone's saying, no, but it's fine. So let's have a good look at it. It's absolutely important that we are aware of this terrible medium called television. All those who don't like audience participation say yes.
Yes.
Well, it's a direct result of television. It's cut us off, so it's very important that we don't do that. But we do sometimes work in television because in some sense you meet people, you greet people, if you can use the medium well, and then in some way your story gets through. Somewhat polluted, but it gets through, and that's the point. Because we had this argument about a specific story. I found the life story of someone called Elena Zhisevska. She was a friend, an associate, and possibly a lover of a great storyteller of this century, Franz Kafka. And she was very prescient in the sense that she knew that he was going to be an acclaimed writer later on, although he wasn't in his lifetime. And she also led a very, very courageous existence. So I told my girlfriend the story. I said, this is a woman's story, and she told other people. And it seemed as if it was going to go very well, until somebody expressed an interest in this story, and we found ourselves arguing over whose story it was. As I say, this is an environment, and perhaps that's the point, in which people are going around, I've got a story, like pigs in the trough. He's wonderful. Paramount, Warner Brothers have optioned up. Columbia, the BBC, CBC, publishers. No, we aren't like that. Except in this particular case we were. That was what disturbed me. And it seemed as if the argument which blew over, which had turned the air blue, was something that we could forget. But that the argument itself came out of something. And it came out, if you like, out of an atmosphere. And it seemed as if the notion that we could own stories, what we felt about stories, if it could actually get in the way of two people caring about each other, then it was affecting the very air we breathe. I also have a son, and like all children, he loves stories. And he's also concerned about what's going on in the world. And he said to me one day, very, very concerned about what was going on, that we should go to all the people who are really messing up the world. He lives in Liverpool. He's just turned 11. People who are messing up the world, and tell them off. When we tell stories, my son and I, there are a number of things that we have to take into account. And I suppose it's as true of telling stories to youngsters as it would be true anywhere in the world in any circumstance. And if you don't mind me digressing just for a moment, I'll give you an example of what I mean, since it's popped into my head that we've had horses out there. There was an example of an 11-year-old child who later grew up to be a very, very fine philosopher, who was stroking the horse. He was stroking the horse, and he found that the horse really loved the stroke. When he went the next day to stroke the horse didn't enjoy it at all. And he realized that the difference was that he was concentrating on his own hand rather than on the horse. And therefore, by being so self-centered, the horse really picked up that notion of just, discomfort. The next story about horses, which is to do with the way the world is, I come, as I probably mentioned, or if I haven't, you may have known this. I come from South Africa, and I was learning to ride one day when somebody said to me, the person who was teaching me to ride suddenly said, if the horse knew its own strength, you'd never be able to ride it. So there's my son being concerned about people who are being ridden in the world, if you like, and saying we should just do something about it. And I sat down and I wrote to all the great leaders of the world, all the powerful people all over the world, and said, I wrote several drafts of it, but when I finally got there, it was, have you ever considered that you might be wrong? And I was just putting the why on the words, and if so, when are you going to declare this publicly? When there was a rat in my kitchen. Now, with all stories, there is this notion of moral dilemma. What are we going to do? This was a huge moral dilemma of our times. There I was, out in the world, caring about things that were going on, and suddenly there's a rat in the kitchen. Does anyone have any feelings about what to do with this rat? Would you kill it? Yes. I think a lot of people would. But it is, you see, because I don't believe in slaughter, and because I'm trying to be a vegetarian, I was torn. I thought, at the one and the same time, I don't want slaughter, but at the same time, there's a child next door, and the rat could eat it. There's disease, there's so many factors. I must say, a couple of nights ago when I asked this question, should I kill the rat? Somebody said, depends on the size of the rat. So, it really was a moral dilemma about time. It was like, somebody described to me the other day that he was going through a real moral dilemma because he wanted to be a vegetarian, but he was allergic to tofu. And somebody else said, what do you do when you're writing to a loved one? Do you use recycled emotions or recycled paper? They're much more spiky ones, like if you're dealing with people from Eastern Europe, what do you say, when you welcome them? Welcome to freedom, comrade, you're fired. Or, if you're having a big meal, what do you do? Do you feel guilty about Ethiopia before or after you've had your coffee? So there's many, many spiky concerns in the world, and that was one of the things that was going through my mind. So I found all the religious leaders in the world, and I said, should I kill this rat? And basically they said, kill it, but don't hurt it. Going through this terrible torment, suddenly the rat spoke to me. Come on, Jack. Put me out of my misery. Squeeze the trigger. I said, but you talk about misery. I just had a fight with my girlfriend. Fights with girlfriends. That's why I'm a rat in this life. But I mean, that's all very well for you to say that, but it doesn't stop you. I mean, you were cynical in your earlier life, and you're still cynical, and you're still kind of responsible for the rot. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not at all. I think I'm the exception. Or at least I'm aware. I mean, I think stories are very important, Jack, and what's happening to them. The pollution is terrible. Have you ever seen a film called Casablanca? Because in that film, there's all the legends, all the myths. God, that's a hard word to say. All the difficult things in the world, all the legends, they're all in that one film, the tales.
It's a story of love and loss, just like Romeo and Juliet. It's a story of a gift that's given and taken away. It's a story of an irrepressible hero who likes me personified. And it's a story of feminine wiles, just like the searching myth. Are you following me so far?
Yes, I am. It's fascinating.
It's also a story of a person who isn't involved until the last moment. A story just like Cinderella, in other words. It's a story of a person who doesn't take action until too late, perhaps, like Achilles or Hamlet. The story of a sex pot married to a nymph, like Camelot or Tristan and Isolde. And it's a story of a bad guy whose debt is finally called in. Faustian, positively Faustian. So all the stories in all the world, they had to walk in a line. And they walk into all of us. Those stories, they still speak to us. That's why the important one for you is the quest.
So I was on a quest, and in order to go on a quest, in order to get that bit about sentences getting through, and the bit about the story getting through, it's very important that we take our shoes off. And swap them with other people. Because you can't really listen to stories or go, unless you're wearing the other person's shoes. I'm very pleased that nobody's actually done that. We're beginning to blind obedience later. Before you can go on a quest for the story, there are many things, as I've said, that get in the way. Another story of a horse is of a horse that can actually calculate. This horse was a genius, a mathematical genius called Little Hans in Germany at the turn of the century. And his keeper would say, you know, what's 20 times 4? And the horse would tap it out. Tens with one foot and units with the other. Say 9 times 9 would be 8 tens and then 1 1 sort of thing. And then they thought, what an incredible, until they realized that in fact the horse was taking the personal signs that people gave out, the human signals, the non-verbal communication. Watch it get there. You could see people craning forward and getting excited, and then, which was much easier than the others, but he could pick up all the little signs as well. The other things that are in the way, just before we go on our quest of the story, just in the way, we've done the shoes. The other things are to do with just little points that you've probably seen many, many times, like the way people talk when they seem to make the voice come straight out of the finger. I've noticed a lot of your commercials here have that. We have them at home as well. Carpets, you know. Buy. It's a remarkable kind of ventriloquist sound. Stop talking, you naughty guy, sit down. It seems to zoom up there, and I suppose, well, certainly my father, and a lot of fathers could do that as well. Computers seem to do that as well, don't they? You know, roll file, beep. It's almost as if metaphorically their finger comes out and points at you. It's one of the things that they could do with computers is make them a little more human, I suppose, or a little less human. But then there are other things that really are in the way of communication. Recently I was on a plane and the air hostess said, would you like a sweet for the ears? And candy for the ears, what an amazing concept. I thought, how wonderful in my country, South Africa, or in Britain where I live now, 95% of the population could benefit from having that little, excuse me, can I just pop a little candy in your ear? There's one more, because we will be getting to the Holy Grail later, which is the salute. The origin of the salute was the visor. You know, people realized that they couldn't hear if they couldn't see, and so they open up the visor. The origin of the salute. Not that has made any difference to the vast majority of soldiers and other people in the world who are in positions of authority, because it seems as if the visor's gone right into the eye. But there you are. So those are the many things that are in the way of communication, even before we start to tell the story. But then, I thought the next stage, having established how it is that we deal with each other on an interpersonal basis, as it were, what happens in the media? So first, I spoke to someone who'd had dealings with television. Yeah, I was in Hollywood for a bit. I was an associate producer. An associate producer is the only person who will associate with a producer. And I was very, very concerned. There was this guy who worked for Columbia Pictures, right? Here's a bloke who's actually embezzling money, right, from his partners. He's a person who's taken a lot of money, and I don't know why he's had to do it. And they call him in and they say, David, did you take it? Don't forget what these people do. They're in charge of the stories that we see, or at least a lot of them. So the kind of stories that they live are going to affect us just as much as the stories that they tell. He goes, no, I didn't take the money. They say, David, did you? He says, no, I swear to God. Now, policemen hear this kind of thing a lot, you know, like 10, 15 times a day, but I still think it's kind of heavy when they, David, did you take the money? He said, no, I didn't, no, I didn't. I swear on my son's life. That's just one side of what happens in Hollywood. The other thing is to do with movies generally, just to do with how they're made. Like when they were making Gandhi, all these people in India were really starving and they heard the film was being made, so they all kind of rushed around to come and get some of the food. And also, and there's like, I don't know, 500,000, I don't know how many, hundreds of thousands of people to pay tribute to Gandhi, who was a man who hated violence. So they're all crowding around trying to pay tribute to this bloke. What happens? In comes the police and bash them on the head, you know. I mean, hundreds of policemen came in, whacking them. Maybe, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of other, there's another example of film. Passage to India, right? I mean, they blew up a sacred mountain for that. Bloody sacred mountain. Of course, it's a very powerful thing, telling stories. And what we discovered was that it was one of the most important weapons that you could use to be in charge of people's minds. We were told many stories. There were stories, for instance, which indicated to us that certain races were very much like rats and therefore vermin and therefore should be killed. It was an easy equation and one that everybody could understand. There are also instances of stories. For instance, there was one where there were a number of people shown begging to be killed. They were people who were ill. They were so-called useless consumers or useless eaters. They were a drain on the society. They were sick and they were suffering. And so euthanasia, the word, has a prefix EU meaning beautiful. And so people said that to be killed in this way was beautiful. There are many letters to Hitler himself that have been collected, in which grandparents and parents begged for their children and grandchildren to be killed.
Traveling around, as I have done from the Soviet Union and in the West as well, I've seen many instances of the power of storytelling and how important it is that we hang on to our own personal memories and listen to our own voices. Under Stalin, every child, by the time the child was 7, had to know a story which told of how a young boy betrayed his own parents and had them killed. This was a very important story for all of us. It was also crucial that we kept within ourselves our own stories, even under those circumstances. There is a joke, and it exists in Russia still today, about our history and how it has been tampered with and airbrushed. They say it is very difficult for us to predict our past. Now that I have traveled in the East and the West, I see something else also, an excess of materialism. It is as if people, when they become wealthy, are committed only to dental floss. And there are many countries in the world where people are committed to everything but, particularly when they have no food between their teeth. It is as if we have the food and they have the stories, and it needs to be shared more evenly. An excess of materialism is one of the main reasons, I believe, for this rut jerk of which you are speaking.
I want to speak to a storyteller who lives in England but who comes from India.
It's always fascinating to me the way people come to ask us about our wonderful culture. And at the same time, we seem to be so often in so many countries at the bottom of the heap. But once there was a storyteller who in fact was nature in disguise. The sustainer of the universe decided that she would go down and she would become a person and tell stories. Now, Jack, you are a fine storyteller and performer. And to an extent, people come and see you in certain numbers, but we won't say huge numbers, or at least not at first. Later on, in the final weeks, people clamor for seats, and then they phone you up and ask you. But it's very nice, and it's the same for me. Well, nature herself, the storyteller, has a certain number of people, and the house is built in the same way, only quicker. And in this particular village, the hall is absolutely packed. So much so, says the storyteller, that on a particular day, a young man wants to go and listen to the stories, and he's rushing around, getting ready and getting ready. He's done all the washing up for the family. He's very, very excited, when suddenly there's a knock at the door. He goes to the door, he opens the door, and there's an old man there. He says, I'm in a terrible hurry, I want to go to the storytelling. And the old man says, well, I'm in a hurry too, because I'm terribly thirsty. The man says, right. He goes and gets some water. And as he's getting the water, he thinks, this has made a huge difference to our lives. I never thought that storytelling would have that effect. But I would never have got water for anybody in any circumstances. I'd have been too busy. He gets the water, he brings it to the old man, he hands the pot, the copper pot to the old man drinks it down, says, thank you very, very much, and hands the pot back. And the young man says, this isn't my pot. The old man says, that is your pot. The young man says, it's not my pot, I gave you a copper pot. The old man says, that is your pot, but this is golden. That is your pot, says the old man, and leans over and touches a lock, and the lock turns to gold, and he touches a bolt, and the bolt turns to gold. The young man opens the door, and the old man goes and he touches something else, and that also turns to gold. And so interested is the young man that at the end of the storytelling session, he's still fascinated. And he's only just bade goodbye to the old man. And everyone comes around and says, why weren't you at the storytelling? Why weren't you at the storytelling? He says, well, this old man came, and this old man touched things, and he turned them to gold. And so then, from then on, everyone's chasing around looking for this old man, and they find him, and they bring the old man and show him things to touch so that he can turn them to gold. And it goes on and on and on until the next day, nature herself, the sustainer of the universe, is sitting in a hall, and it is absolutely empty. And another god comes along and says, why is no one coming? And she says, well, they're all following around an old man. And that old man is the god of wealth. He is my husband in disguise. They don't know that, and they also don't know that when they follow him around and they ignore my stories, I leave the town. And when I leave the town, he follows because he's devoted to me. Nature herself, the sustainer of the universe, and the god of wealth can be in the same town. We are often in the same town together. That is possible. But if we are forgotten, if my stories are forgotten, then I will go, and the god of wealth will go with me. And then there is only the right. That is all. Finished. Now, often I ride along on my log through the rot. And one day, as I was going through the rot, there was this enormous breaker. I said, what is that? And someone said, that is a climatic disturbance of the air-sea interface. I said, you mean a wave? Then I saw something. I said, what is that? And they said, that is a deforestation unit in an arboreal amenity. I said, you mean a tree in a park? Then I saw something. I said, what is that? And they said, that is a ground replacement utensil. I said, why don't you call it a spade? Then I heard some screams. What is that? Someone said, oh, that's pacification. So in order to try and find out about language, I was on this quest, as I say, looking at, finding out all sorts of things, when suddenly, as these things happen, I was talking about Austria and Australia to my 11-year-old son. And I could see that he was confused. And I realized there's another element of language, which is that it sounds a bit the same, but it isn't the same. I said, you don't really get the difference, do you? And I tried to explain that Austria was in Europe and Australia was way down south, and so we went on about that. And at the end of the conversation, I knew he hadn't got it, because he said, well, I've heard of Australia, but I haven't heard of Australia. Then we were telling a story a little while later,
we were reading a story and we came upon two characters called Glossie and Flossie, and suddenly went, Glossie and Flossie, that's like Australia and Austria, isn't it? I said, yeah, you've got it, yes. And then I sort of poured out all the things that really I could remember from when I was small, like precision and position, how different that was and how difficult it was to tell the difference. In fact, my brother still mixes them up and he's well into his 40s. And then I mentioned soldier and shoulder. Yeah. And it's like break and break and break and red and red and lead and lead and lead and lead and bean and bean and bean and leak and make up a story and make up your face and make up your mind and make up an argument. I said, yeah. Then he said, I really don't want you to die. Have I been standing here in front of you with my flyer all on? How deeply disturbing. Well, there you are. Not one of you bothered to say. That's very funny. And fly and fly and fly. Well, there you are. I promise you I don't do that every night, but I should as a test. How wonderful. That's really great. All I can say is now there's so many jokes that I'm going to avoid all of them. Or should I? Do you want me to say something? You'd rather I did. Anyway, my son said, I don't want you to die, which meant I don't want you to die, not die of embarrassment, but die. And I said, well, I'm going to, probably. In fact, there's no what if about it. And then I told him a story, which is, it's actually a Chinese story, a traditional story. It's only 6 words, and you can make up your mind whether it's happy or sad. Grandfather dies, father dies, son dies. In fact, it's happy, because it's the natural order of things, not the natural order of things, the natural order of things. And I said, in fact, it's not necessarily going to be that bad an experience. And my son said, yeah, I've heard death's very tranquilizing. Dad, what's the universe in? Suddenly, the first emptiness brought forth the second emptiness. Suddenly, the second emptiness brought forth the vast emptiness. Suddenly, the vast emptiness brought forth the boundless emptiness. Suddenly, that brought forth the dry emptiness, which suddenly brought forth the barren emptiness, which suddenly brought forth the restricted emptiness, which suddenly brought forth the pleasant emptiness, which suddenly brought forth darkness called pearl. Modern physicists, the storytellers of today, are suddenly realizing, very, very late, how accurate the ancient myths are in terms of depicting the universe. For instance, Shiva, an androgynous god, goddess. This is supposed to be the dance of the universe, and modern scientists are saying it's a very good depiction of it. But it's also a moral story in a way, because Shiva's dancing on the demon, and the demon is human ignorance. One leg is uplifted, as if to say we must be free from restricting concepts. That doesn't mean that you should have your flies open, but still. You should be free from restricting concepts. One of the hands is pointing down because she has 4 arms. One of the hands is pointing down to that uplifted foot. The other arms saying, we're in a dance of creation and destruction. The natural order of things, life and death. And the 4th arm is there to say, not stop, not obey, but do not be afraid. It's a way of relaxing, of freeing up the mind, which is exactly what the universe is supposed to be like. An open improvisation. The restricting way in which Western science tries to bend it is remarkable. Well, it's all terribly difficult to understand. One must try and get the human mind, though, to understand what this universe was before the universe began. That is a a question that we're continually asked, and all I can say is, try and imagine nothing. And try and imagine that nothing not in anything. In other words, everything is in one spot, and that spot is zero. And it's not in anything other than zero. It is a zeroness so profound that language doesn't really go there. It's and then there was the Big Bang. Well, when we say then, we can't really say then because there was no time then, you see. No space, no time. There was nothing. That's right. It was just no time, no space, nothing, no future, no filofaxes or television guides or meal plannings or anything like that. Bang! And then the universe mattered, but only then, only after that, the universe mattered spiritually. People still say, what was it? What was this entity? What was this new before the bang? What was it? Well, it's very, very simple. As far as science is concerned, the question doesn't apply. The question can't apply because no now to be after that. No now, no after, no because. No because needs a dum-de-dum, which would go from dum-de-dum because of dum-de-dee, which didn't happen then, or it didn't, or there, or where. There was no where for that matter, which one could point to a there or a where. For that matter, there was no matter, because matter is space-time, won't it be? Therefore, there. At least that's the current thinking. According to modern scientific theory. Now, we've already established that in order to listen to stories, we have to wear the other person's shoes, which is something that I do with my son when we tell stories. Because we can't have fires anymore. You have to try and imagine yourself in this land of what if through having bedside lamps, or if you're lucky, a bit of a flame. And as I've already established, it's important for us to wear the other person's shoes in that land of point of view. We've also talked, just briefly, I've said, all those who don't like audience participation say yes. The reason I ask that is because modern scientists are now realizing what the old storytellers knew when they went crick, crack and all that we have no choice but to be participants. Modern scientists are realizing that when they look at a subatomic particle, which you can't see, they try and examine it, the measuring instrument's got subatomic particles in it. So has the physicist. So it's impossible not to be a participant. It's the most important thing. It is not a universe for observation. It's not a universe for having that screen and having a frame round our world. It is a universe for participating. Separation is an illusion. That's something that's very, very gratifying to me, coming from South Africa. What has actually happened is that people are realizing that because of our minds, because we're such wonderful storytellers and such wonderful creators, there's something amazing that our consciousness can do. There are instances of physicists creating subatomic particles. Something that wasn't there suddenly is there because a physicist imagined it. If that's possible, if that's possible, then it is possible that our consciousness is having a huge effect on the universe. And that we may be creating its story in a wonderful improvisation. So, the separation that's happening, intellectually, really so bothered me that when I saw a bit of graffiti that said unite, it was really gratifying. I thought, at last, we're saying bring everything together. How wonderful. What a great idea. So I was on the way to the toilet. And I was thinking, wow, this is amazing. And Aristotle's really got a lot to answer for. This time I remembered to pull out my fly. And I thought he's got a lot to answer for. This guy, he's actually really, driven 2,500 years of school children absolutely mad by separating things up and putting subheadings and so on. Then I came back and I saw that sign and I realized, in fact, that it said Unit E. We have a cartoon in Australia. It's a bloke sitting there with his son, looking at the television, and on the television there's a sunset. Not noticed by them through a window. Outside, there's a real sunset. In 1988, I was asking questions of various people about the presidential election, and there were some journalists, you know, these are guys who are asking the questions at the debate. These are the people who are framing the questions, and I mean, they're very intelligent people. A lot of them are considerably more able than the candidates themselves. Well, I said to them, this is a guy who was actually a participant in the event. I said, what did you think of the debate? He said, I don't know, I haven't seen it on television yet. In 1969, I was, in those days I was in news, television, and current affairs, and I was in charge of the BBC studio. We were monitoring NASA's Apollo 11 mission, and we kept having to announce we've lost contact with Apollo 11, and you know, we've just got no radio contact, so in the meantime here's a cross-section of an astronaut's right knee, or an artist's impression of the moon, or a cardboard replica of President Nixon's earlobe or something. And we kept losing this kind of so-called losing the contact. Of course, we could hear what was going on all the time, but we never lost contact with Apollo 11 for a second. We had a shrink down at Houston, at least they did. We could hear him. And he was talking the boys down, you know. Take the blue pill now. Drink the liquid now, Buzz. Easy now, relax, Michael. What people don't know and they really urgently need to know is that those three fellas in their space capsule, they were screaming in terror. So the quest, the mission, the human voice. My girlfriend and I had a fight about a story. I have a son who, like all children, loves stories. And as someone who'd been on the front line, I was concerned because, you know, I'd had a script editor say to me about something for BBC television, but Jack, this is challenging. and subtle. But it's not to say that writers aren't to blame. I must just set the record straight by telling a story, since it is more or less the anniversary still of the assassination of President Kennedy, and it's one of the great myths of our time. You know, most of us can remember what we were doing when we were first asked what we were doing. Norman Mailer was writing a book about Kennedy, and he came and he said, Norman, Jack Kennedy's been shot, he's dead. And Mailer went, oh my God, no! He can't do this to me. But there was something very serious, and has been for some time, when, just one instance that actually happened to me. I wrote, it was my first commission for the BBC, and not that there have been that many, but it was a story about a black abortionist in South Africa who was taking money for, for the abortions that she was doing in the backyard of a white woman's home. And the white woman was the woman she actually worked for. She was a servant. Now, black people, when black people die, white policemen are pretty pleased in South Africa, so far as I could see, and that was the statement that I was making. I was saying that, you know, they were pleased when black children died, and therefore she was allowed to continue doing her abortions, whatever people felt about the morality of it. The money that she was earning was being kept by a white woman, and the white woman was taking the money and using it. That's basically the story. Well, it's very powerful, Jack. It's a very good statement about racism and exploitation and so on. We're going to do it. Well, when we actually came to record it, the remarkable black actress who was playing the abortionist was a bit slow coming in on cue. And the producer, director, turned to me and said, oh no, she's not going to do it, Jack. They don't have the mentality. There was another problem, I suppose, and that was that being in the theatre from time to time, I found that it was trying very hard to be like the movies. Again, you know, to cut off participation, if you like. I mean, we were having a whale of a time, and at the end, everyone would applaud crazily. There seemed to be some kind of detachment. We were here, my lieging and me fixing and forsoothing like crazy, letting off a lot of esteem. It was wonderful. But there seemed to be something missing, and it seemed as if there was a character that we'd forgotten. But we often had that experience. And that was, the character was quite simply the participants. the most important participant, and that's, without sucking up too much, the audience. That was the next stage, and then there's one more stage after that, which was the notion of truth. If you don't mind, just one very, very quick experiment. This is from life, and it's a touching moment in someone's life, a very powerful emotional moment. And you could never portray this on stage in a traditional drama. You'd have to do it, rather like I'm doing now, you'd have to tell it in this way. And because we're now wearing each other's shoes, metaphorically, if you wouldn't mind being me just for a minute, please. And I'm going to be my brother coming home. And our father's just died. Somebody's just arrived. It's remarkable, isn't it? Let's see, I'm curious. Let's find what this is. Do you want to come in? Oh, come in. This is wonderful. Welcome. I can't start from the beginning. Most important bit is that I spent half the show with my 5-year-old. We're just talking about death again. There are lots of moments when you could be talking about death in this show, and this is one of them. So if you wouldn't mind, I've just arrived as my brother, and you're going to be me, please, and just say Dad's here. That's it. I mean, you might have thought that there's going to be some big kind of emotional, Montgomery Clift or a wonderful modern actor's moment of, no, that's it. Because he was late, you see, not enough time. That's the truth. You couldn't do it on stage. There's so many truths like that, emotional truths, that you couldn't do on stage. So all those factors led to the idea, and it's very fashionable, I know, just to get back to something very, very simple. Sitting on a log and telling stories. Purely by coincidence, two things. One is that I happen to, for some reason beyond, I can't explain why, I recently read a Reader's Digest, yesterday it was, and the whole page of Increase Your Word Power had to do with puns on log. Monologue, dialogue, log. I mean, it's an incredible coincidence. Log, everything was log. Logos, word, log, all these kind of things. And there was, the final one was epilogue. And then I turned open another book, and it said, it was a story from Canada, in fact. And it's a story of a white man sitting on a log. And along comes, I'm awfully sorry, I've got it wrong. It's a story of a native person sitting on a log, and a white man comes along, and the native person's really concerned and says, come and join me, take a seat, make yourself comfortable. And he gives him some warm clothes, because the white man's very, very, and gives him some food, and the white man says, thank you very much. Oh, I'm terribly grateful. And starts to, spread a little bit, and you have to do it that way. It's kind of moving back, but the white man says, do you don't mind if I just lie down for a bit? And eventually he's kind of stretched himself right out over the log and more or less forces the native person to go and sit on the stump. Suddenlies. There's another coincidence to this story. Suddenly, this is a story from the Buddha. Suddenly a man's being chased by a tiger. Suddenly he gets to a cliff. He climbs up the cliff, he gets to the top of the cliff. The cliff starts to crumble. Suddenly he finds himself falling down. He gets halfway down, he grabs onto a branch. He feels safe. Suddenly, 2 rats come and gnaw the branch. Crack. The tiger's still down below. Suddenly he sees a strawberry. Picks it, pops it in his mouth and eats it. And says, how delightful. Last week, a man was in the audience. He'd known me when I was a member of a so-called radical group as schoolboy in Johannesburg, South Africa. He's now a psychiatrist, this guy, and he explained the show to me. And he said, afterwards he said, it's an amazing coincidence. I told my son that story of the tiger and all that yesterday. That's amazing. I said, wow, what an incredible coincidence. Did you just explain it? It's wonderful. All these stories happening all over the place. It's great. Zing! Anyway, so and I thought that's an incredible coincidence. Wow, I went back home into a new place where I was staying, opened a book, and there, front page, that story. Here's another story. Heaven and hell. A woman goes on a conducted tour of hell and heaven. She goes down to hell first, and in hell, there's a table. The table is laden with food, and all the people are sitting around, and they're tied to their chairs, and tied to their wrists are very, very long forks, and they can't get the food into their mouths. Very tantalizing, horrible. It's hell. They go up to heaven, and in heaven, big table, lots of food. People are tied to chairs. They have long forks. Different expressions. They've hit on a solution. They're feeding each other. Somebody dies and goes to a wonderful place. In this wonderful place, everything he wants he can get instantly. Food, clothes, sexual partner of his choice, cars, planes, oh yes, or anything he wants he can get instantly. And this is just tremendous. Films, plays, shows, you know, it's just perfect. And it's just wonderful for a long, long time, you know, at least a week and a day or so. And then he goes to the headman and he says, excuse me, I don't want to complain about the service, but I just want to say that, do you think this is ridiculous, but do you think I'd go to hell for a bit? For a challenge or something? And the headman says, where do you think you are? Person dreams of a wonderful place and goes there after she's died. It is paradise, but then she realizes that people are being tortured. There are screams, shackles, manacles, imprisonments, and so on. She goes to the headman and she says, this isn't anything like the place I dreamed of. And the headman says, ah yes, when you came before, you came as a tourist. One more. There's a master with a warrior, and the warrior says, tell me the difference between heaven and hell. Really wants to know. The master won't tell him, the master won't tell him, the master won't tell him. After a while, the master just every now and then says some remark like, you're not really up to it, you know, or spiritually you're below par, or you're a bit stupid anyway. Don't expect you to be scared of that sword, you couldn't cut your way through a wet paper bag. Eventually the warrior loses his temper. He's so upset that the master won't tell him the difference between heaven and hell. Draws his sword, he's just about to cut the master's head off. Hello! And the master says, that's hell! The warrior sheathes the sword, bows very low, and blushes. The master says, that's heaven. So there I was. This is time for a real shake-up. We've had guests come in, we've had the excitement of all sorts of things happening. Andy's in tonight, and he said, you know, people need a 7th inning stretch of thing. Whatever that means. Because it's the personal bit. This is unusual, apparently, for storytelling, because, you know, who knows what the rules are. But it's unusual for people to talk. But these are stories that they all mean something to me, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be telling. But these are the ones that, on the quest, suddenly kind of focused something. The first is Adam and Eve. It's obviously paradise, heaven, and hell story. And I could never understand why Adam and Eve were you know, so wrong to have eaten of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And I always hear these priests say, it was very, very bad of them to have eaten of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It was up to them to learn their lesson, sin. Because once they'd started something, it was up to them to finish it, shit. After a while, it would seem as if he was coming to the point. He'd say, it was bad of them to eat of the fruit of knowledge because... Yes, because... A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. There'll be a meeting of the bridge club on Thursday. Or, you know, there'll be a meeting of the hockey club. Then, nice experience actually working in the theatre, and we had a religious advisor on the time. I mean, if you can get your head around that concept, then. It was just an amazing thought that we actually had a religious advisor. And I went up to this guy, quietly, and I said, excuse me, I never understood why it was bad of Adam and Eve to have eaten of the fruit of tree of knowledge of good and evil. And he said, I don't think it was bad at all. What? No, I think it was fine. What do you mean? Well, I think God wanted him to. What? I think God wanted them to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because he wanted them to grow up. And someone told me a story about God saying to Adam and Eve, look, you've got to go, loves. Fine. I mean, you really have to go, sorry. It's just time to leave. The thing is, he said, as they were off skiing, he said, I'm just a bit concerned because I don't want them to be devoid of human divinity. I just don't want it to be too easily accessible. And an angel turned to him and said, well, why don't you hide human divinity inside each person, God? That's the last place they'll look. Prometheus. You know, I mentioned Kafka, the Prometheus. Oh my God, it's going to be homework, you know. These are names, you know, you mention these names like Wittgenstein. You start the sentence and instantly people feel stupid. I think that's what they really like that. Anyway, Prometheus stole fire, and that was another act of disobedience. He stole fire and he gave it to human beings. And he suffered for it. I mean, he was chained to a rock for like, 1,000 years, and he had a vulture or an eagle pecking at his liver, so, and we didn't hear the scream. But I mean, the point is that we got fire, and that's what distinguishes us from other creatures. And it was an act of disobedience. I mean, disobedience is a very important part of stories. We all know those stories when we just wish she wouldn't obey. Says, you stay here, darling. I'll go on alone. Don't stay there! Don't obey! But of course she does. Big mistake. Or there's the other one where, in order for the story to go on, it's like, excuse me, we're looking for the house on the hill. How do we get there? You don't want to go up there. Of course, they have to go up there. Or the uncle. My dear, you can look in any room in the castle except that one. So thank goodness for Prometheus, because we have had stories like that, because fire keeps people away. The other things that distinguish us from other creatures, we have thumbs, which we can pick up language. Oops. We are aware of being. We tell stories. We have imaginations. We drink whether thirsty or not. We make love all year round. Although the other night when I said that, somebody said, "Speak for yourself." Which I most certainly wasn't. And we blush. Not just when we, there are lots of reasons why we blush. And there are a lot of reasons why we should, including the fact that we're the only creatures that kill our own kind. Which is what Orestes did. He killed his mother. I mean, you can see Oprah Winfrey and Donahue and people like that fighting over this guy Orestes. Man, we've got at least half an hour's worth of material here. And then somebody said, no, actually Oedipus is a much better bet. What he did, 2 opportunities to zoom in and watch him cry. Anyway, Apollo's there, saying, look, this guy obeyed me. That's why he's in trouble. He obeyed me. I'm a god and he's just a mortal. And in the middle of this wonderful speech, don't forget, he's being defended. Orestes suddenly says, hang on a sec. I actually did it. It was me. I'm responsible. I wasn't just obeying orders. I've no one to blame but myself. And then the next one that means something to me is Percival. It's a great story, this. Percival did performed 2 acts of disobedience. One was, he was brought up by his mother and a knight who might have been his uncle. But the point is the knight was quite strict and strong and manly, and his mother was just taught him to listen to his own voice. So when he was brought before this woman, they said, marry this woman, and he said no, and the woman said no. And the decision was that they would marry the partner of their choice. It's the first time, apparently, in story that happened. It's supposed to be the beginning of Europe. Whatever you think of Europe, and we know what the rats think of Europe, but that's the first bit of Percival's kind of story. The next thing is, there he is, he's a knight, visors down, like those football players or hockey players or motorcycle couriers. He comes to see the Grail King. The Grail King's really in a bad way. He's really suffering. Percival doesn't ask questions, because it's a rule. The Knights of the Round Table, you don't ask questions. It's your honor. You take care now. You have a nice day. There he goes. Many, many battles. Comes back. The Grail King's still suffering. You may laugh, the guy's still suffering. So, what does Percival do? He goes down, lifts the visor. I don't care about this law. I don't care about this rule of the Knights of the Round Table. Now, I always thought the Holy Grail was kind of a cup or a mug, or, you know, the front of a Lincoln Continental, or a grill on a barbecue, you know, or braces on someone's teeth or something. This is it. What else? That's it. That's it. What's the matter? You listen. He disobeyed the law of his group and found the Holy Grail. Asked someone what the matter was. Asked a question. Holy Grail. That's it. In the Canadian Army, apparently the drill goes left, 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 right, left. In the British Army, you know, people say, is that right? Nobody knows. I'm very, very proud of you. No wonder you can take your shoes off. Isn't that extraordinary? You don't have things like the draft or anything like that. I mean, you know, there's draft and draft. Somebody thought that's fun too. But I mean, you don't have that kind of thing. In the British Army, it was, you horrible little man, do you feel anything? I'm standing on your hair! All that kind of thing. Did you shave with bustigates this morning? Bustigates. Best joke of the whole day, bustigates. Well, so anyway, but in the South African Army, linksrechts has been corrupted to likja. Likja, likja. Linksrechts. Likja, likja, likja. Right! Likja, right! Somebody said the other night that it sounds like a cat puking. So, of course, the question is, how am I still laughing if I've actually been in the South African Army? Well, I mean, you know, it's just the complete irrationality of it. And the fact is, I think I haven't really introduced you to two characters called Oof and Few. When I was going to pick on people, or something, you know, it's Oof, is he going to pick on someone? Few, he isn't. Or Oof. Somebody said it, if Few, it hasn't, you know. Oof without Few, that's tragedy. And that's also a part of life. But in the South African Army, it was a sort of an Oof without a Few, really. But the thing is that there was something of a few in as much as I never saw action. There was something of a few in as much as I don't have blood on my hands. But the oof that I can't get rid of is that I went to talk. It's the greatest single regret of my life. And I'm telling the story now because it's to do, I suppose, with whether you obey or disobey, and who you disobey, and how you listen to your own voice. And because I've had the experience of wearing the other person's army boot, something I'm not particularly proud of, at least I can tell the story. My parents and my relatives were really opposed to apartheid, and a number of my relatives were so active that they were punished for it. So it wasn't as if it wasn't a dissident family, it was. But the thing was that we were encouraged to go to the army as relatives of dissidents because that's what all the relatives of dissidents were doing. And I didn't agree with that, and they said, but if you don't go to the army, then you will cause problems for yourself and you'll go to prison, that'll be the end of your life story. That wasn't convincing either. And really nothing was convincing until they said the people who are actually in prison, and they are related to you, those people, will suffer more if you make your stand. So instead of being Percival and disobeying the glorious group, and a round table group, I went to the army. But my name is Sergeant Nell. You're in the army now, civil life is over. We have a film that we sometimes show here. It's called Wise Guys. It's a film with Audie Murphy. It's a very old film. I quite like old films, and I quite like Audie Murphy, but I don't like Wise Guys. So they were very clear about that. And there was all those things of getting you to move, you know. There's a tree over there, we have a word in the army called bavia. I want you all, bavia, move. I want you all to go and pick a leaf from that tree and bring it back here. Are you back already? You all bring a leaf. You all brought a leaf. Have you no respect for nature? Take it back. So by now you're getting a picture that the mind is really involved in this imaginative effort of finding the most extraordinary things to obey, like preparing for inspection. Don't make waves, you know, people may suffer in prisons, so you make your toothpaste tube and your shaving cream square. Thing of real extraordinariness. There you are. A number of times people said, why? Why? Well, exactly why, but there you are. There is no why. Then you have to get that shape, that kind of corner, into your bed. The grey blanket, you've got to make that square. How would you do that? Well, it's not what the human mind can do. Imagination led us, under instruction, to bite the bed. You bite the corner in. Amazing. And then you go around the other side. Yeah. So now the mind is really involved in a kind of a game. It's a tragedy as farce. It's mania. So that you get to the stage when you're actually obeying this extraordinary kind of rehearsal, which is like the theatre, which is running at a cushion and stabbing it. Bayonet drill. Ah! Of course you know that it's really rehearsal. It's only a rehearsal. Ah! Just make-believe. Well, thank goodness it was just make-believe, but you can see how close it was. Then they took us to a room filled with gas. Suddenly we were on the other side. We had to run through the whole thing because we couldn't get back. That was locked. We ran onto this grassy verge. I suddenly realized this is tear gas. That's what it is. It's to deal with people who disobey. And of course it's not, I always thought it was just the streaming eyes, but in fact it stops you breathing. These youngsters, kids, you know, 16, 17-year-old soldiers, learning how to deal with tear gas, you know, in case they have to deal with disobedience. And looking back on it, I realized that the people I really loved in that world were the people who had no breath, who were sobbing, who were hurt in some way, who couldn't breathe, who had red eyes, who were crying and so on. Those are the people I really liked. The people who I didn't were the clear-eyed ones. And now, through a series of seemingly unavoidable, though obviously avoidable events, there I was, one of the clear-eyed ones. And because I was good at sport and fit, they made me an officer. Suddenly, I'm bored. Suddenly, I like stretching my legs. Suddenly, I like making noise. Suddenly, I like shouting. Suddenly, a lot of people tell me to shut up. Suddenly, much later on, I heard of a little boy who thought his name was Shut Up. Suddenly, at school, we have a teacher called Miss Van der Walt, and every time she wants to tell a story, everyone's very quiet. She's very pretty, except when she has a black eye. Suddenly, my father is hitting my brother with a strap. Suddenly, every time my father hits my brother, I find my brother is hitting me. Suddenly, we have a teacher called Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett likes to hit people on the hand with a ruler, especially Denise Sawyer. Once he hits her at least 20 times on each hand. Suddenly, I'm in high school, and we have a teacher called Miss Lamb, who's really encouraging me to be in the theatre. Suddenly, Miss Lamb stops the class and says, "Ek kan nie aangaan nie, Klaff is so lelik." I can't go on because Klaff is so ugly. Suddenly, yet again, it feels as if it's difficult to get friends. Suddenly, Peter tells me that Sally Ann really likes me. Suddenly, Sally Ann and I are kissing each other in the projection room. It's a really good private moment, and I can't wait to tell someone. Suddenly, Sally Ann's going off with Roy Hardman, who has a Suzuki 125. Suddenly, I'm in the army, and they're making me an officer. Suddenly, the youngest boy in the family, the baby, is telling people what to do. Suddenly, I'm in charge. Suddenly, a major's talking to me, quite drunkenly. I tell you, there's a whole story when they talk about Chapel and how many people got killed at Chapel. What they don't ever say is, that they left out a lot of the figures, the television and all those stories, I'll tell you my story. My story is that we killed a hell of a lot more. Suddenly I don't feel a part of that group, and obviously never did. But when they gave me that pep, because I thought there were going to be privileges and I was going to be in charge, just for a bit, I went for it. And I can remember Friday the 13th was the day we got promoted. And I can remember thinking, I thought Friday the 13th was supposed to be unlucky. Man, from now on I'm going to have an easy life. My uncle's name was Easy, his nickname. He really never had an easy life or a relaxed or simple one. From 1960, when he was first detained, he was in some kind of detention in 1963 for 3 months, in 66 for 6 months, then another 6 months, then for 5 years, and then under house arrest. Then they had both he and my aunt Anne had their passports taken away. They were banned for fully 30 years, and that meant that they weren't allowed to tell their story publicly. That was one of the things that they were prevented from doing, being in a gathering of more than 3 people. When a friend of my uncle's was asked about his experiences, he said, "Oh man, compared with what black people go through in South Africa, we just had a parking ticket." And that's absolutely true. My uncle, who did lead a Percival kind of life in so many ways, because he obeyed my grandfather in order to marry my aunt. I'm sorry, he disobeyed, I beg your pardon, he disobeyed my grandfather. You can see that this is a story it's very important that I simply tell. It's not like since I've spent so much time as an actor, learning lines, it's very important that it isn't lines. It's simply that my aunt and uncle would never have expected anyone to tell the story. They were not star dissidents. They harbored Nelson Mandela in their home when he was on the run. But when they died, as they did last year, it wasn't big news, it was just a family thing. It was important for our family. They'd never expect anyone in the media, as it were, to tell the story. But it's precisely because of that I think it's the most important story to tell. It's certainly the most important in my life, because they listen to their own voice, their own voices. My uncle, when he came back for his house, to start a house arrest session, would always say, "Hi, Superman's back." And then it would start, 2 o'clock on Saturday, right through till Monday. He'd have to be indoors. He'd have to be indoors every night. He couldn't go out to the theatre, to cinema, or anything like that. But again, he believed that it was worth it because of what he believed. It was a Percival life as well because he listened. He was the only person I know who could speak most of the languages of the earth, including those of the black people in that country. Could listen and talk in their languages. When he was first arrested, though, it wasn't a kind of big heroic gesture that he made. He just said to his sons, "Look, tell your friends that I'm working for the post office." Don't say, because that's what I am doing, in fact, in prison. I'm sewing mailbags. And the truth of it is that although he downplayed his heroism, in order not, as he said in his trial, which I read as a law student, he said as his trial, "I don't want to go to jail, but I don't want to betray my friends." And from that, suddenly, when I read that as a law student, right back to the earlier suddenly when they were first arrested, and my red-eyed mother said to me, they've gone to prison for what they believe in. I realized that it was an upside-down sort of world, a world in which people could go to jail and they weren't naughty. But my uncle as hero, well, it's not a mythical heroism, it's just an ordinary, rather inventive heroism. In order not to betray his friends, he took his egg, his breakfast egg. It's the symbol of life, the mythical symbol of life, ate it. Because he didn't have shoelaces or belt or any knives or forks or anything like that, he just took the shell and tried to cut his wrists and rode with them. Thank goodness he was spared. And the truth of it is much more, as I say, the truth's always much more mundane than the big speeches, When my aunt was released the first time, she didn't come up and say, "We go on to everyone, till everyone is free." She didn't make any big speeches. She walked over to a mirror and said, "Hell, hunger strikes a great man, you lose so much weight, eh?" And when it comes to oof and few, the oof side of this, the oof without the few is, I suppose, what a Russian writer said. In Russia, we live only to prove Franz Kafka right. And my aunt and uncle that were banned for 30 years, and the banning order was lifted as they were dying. The few side of it, if you like, although they both died, as I say, last year, is that they loved each other so much. If I had a picture of love, it would be my aunt, well into her 40s, really excited that he was going to be released. And when she died, he couldn't hang on. In fact, died within a day. So that's the fairy tale. And I think that is an awful few side of it. When my mother wrote, telling me about the going, she just said she would never forget them. And beautiful and brave. And my uncle, who stuck to his ideals, listened to his voice. As I say, it's a story from mouth to ear. It's not a story for like a play that one could write or anything like that. It's just so good to be able to talk in this way, just about them. And to tell you one more story, which was that on Primrose Hill in London, it's an ancient burial mound. And I was talking about them a little while ago. And as I finished speaking about them and other people finished speaking about people they left behind in Africa, from Regent's Park Zoo, there was the roar of a lion, the African lion. It's so good to have someone to listen. That's what I suddenly said, and suddenly I feel an African storyteller with me. It is good to tell stories. Yes, I know, but we don't tell stories mouth to ear anymore. In fact, I was going to write something about that, but I'm not sure that I could sell it. You sell stories? Oh yeah, that's how we live. In fact, that's the argument we had. You know, I wrote the story, and then my girlfriend kind of got it, and she wanted it, and then somebody else wanted it, and that's it. I mean, yeah, people really are involved with life stories, buying and selling of life stories. This person's life story, you want to tell it? Well, yeah. Why did the person not tell it themselves? Well, she was dead. But you see, I got there first. Where? To the story, it was my idea. This dead person's life story was your idea. No, you don't understand. When you sell the life story, what is it that you buy? I see now why your eyes are like that. Once there was a spider, and the spider wanted all the stories in the world. There is a box of stories with all the stories in the world. And the spider went to the master of the horizon and said, I want all the stories in the world, I want the box. And the master of the horizon said, I want offerings, I want 3 offerings. And so for the first offering, the spider went and got sugar. You know, sugar cane. But to get this sweet thing of sugar, it's not so easy. First you must have a rat. We don't like rats, but the rat keeps the other insects away. Then you must have a snake. We don't like snakes, but the snake will keep the rat away. And the spider took the leaf of the sugar cane and wound the leaf around the rat and the snake, and that was the first offering, this sweet sugar for the box of stories. And the second offering, the spider took a rock and took some honey and took the black stripes from the zebra and put them around the rock and made music. Slowly, the invisible spirit came, and the invisible spirit was on the rock, stuck to the rock by the honey, and then the spider took the stripes and wound the stripes around the rock and took the invisible spirit as the second offering for the box of stories. And then the master of the horizon said, I want your mother. I know, said the spider. I want your mother. No, your mother. And so the spider went to his mother and said, you must go. The mother went. And that was the third offering. And that is how the spider got the box of stories. If you have all the stories in the world, then you are God. And the spider opened the box and looked in the stories that were now his. And then suddenly, all the trees and all the plants and all the flowers and all the creatures of the sea and all the creatures of the air and the animals, all of them, with the breath and with the wind, they breathed in and they breathed out with a scream, a big scream. And he blew all the stories of the world, all around the world, so no one creature can ever hold it. Just to prove that, because they're all claiming the story. One more, just all to a bit of fun. There was an evil brother and a good brother. The evil brother ate a lot and the good brother didn't eat so much. The good brother went round to the evil brother and said, give me food, and every so often the evil brother did give him food. But this particular day the evil brother said, go to the devil. But he has a mouthful of food. So he's saying, go to the devil. And the good brother thought he said, go to Denzel. He went away thinking, what is this advice? I don't want to obey this guy. But he said, Denzel, I think. So he spoke to his wife and he said, I'm going to see a guy called Denzel. So I've had this advice. She said, you're crazy. He said, well, look, I'll leave this as the last bit of food that I can possibly find. And he left her a little bit of bread. He said, I'll be back as soon as I can. I'm just going to test this. It's our last hope, so I may as well test it. And he went on and he came to a tree and he picked the fruit of the tree. And the fruit of the tree was very, very bitter. Ah, it's disgusting, he said. And the tree said, I know. He said, how did you come to be so bitter? And the tree said, I don't know. He said, well, I'm on my way to find this man called... And if I find this man called... Then maybe I'll be able to find out why your fruit is so bitter. And the tree said, well, if you can, I'll be very, very... happy, grateful, or grappy, or hateful. No, I won't be hateful. I'll certainly be grappy. So he goes down and he comes to a house. And in the house, there are 3 young people, and they have a very wicked stepfather and stepmother. And they have to do all the work all the time, and it's very, very boring. They don't want to be so obedient anymore. They want to do something worthwhile. They want to realize their dreams. He says, well, I'm on my way. He said, I'm on my way to find a man called... If I find a man called, maybe he'll be able to help. And you can realize your dreams, because the young man wants to be the owner of, or at least a partner in a toy shop. The young woman, one of them, wants to run in a race and be the fastest of the land, and one wants to get married. And he says, well, look, I'll do my best to find this man called, and if I do, then maybe he'll help you. And they say, well, if you can, we'll be very, very... He comes to a river, and in this river, there's all sorts of horrible, sludgy, nasty stuff, and he can't get across because there's no bridge. Along comes a ferryman, and the ferryman rows over to the side. He hops in, and you can see the ferryman is really not even helping him in, because he's so consumed with his own problem, and he's rowing along very, very sadly, and so he says, what's wrong? The ferryman says, I have to go back and forth across the river because all my life, my whole existence is going back and forth, back and forth. He says, well, I'm on my way to find a man called... Listen, it's not obligatory to shout out there, so it's just funny, you know. We're claim to something. I mean, it's gentle, no, it's not. So anyway, he says, well, I'm on my way to find a man called... And if I find a man called, then maybe I'll be able to help you. And they say, well, if you can, the ferryman says, I'll be very, very, very... And so he comes to a cliff, and on the cliff there's a house, and in the house there's a Denzel! Well, no. I'm sure my director won't mind if I go over a little bit of time to tell you a very brief story of the Cheltenham Literary Festival, where there was a storyteller who told this very involved story about a king, and he had no money, and the king said, I have no money and I love dancing, because the bank manager said, you have to stop dancing, you can't have any money. And the king said, well, what should I do? And he went out and he looked at the tree, the grass, and the grass was dancing, and he heard the crickets, and the crickets were singing. And so what would he do? And one child said, well, he listened to the crickets and he danced to that. No. The one said, he watched the dancing of the grass, and then he enjoyed that. No. He enjoyed the dancing of his own mind. No. Denzel, no. He found that we couldn't, the whole thing is that he didn't find Denzel. What he did find was he found the wise old man of the forest. And the wise old man of the forest said, do come in, old fella. Do tell me your story. He told me so that he'd been looking for a guy called Denzel. And then said, well, and the wise old man said, well, I don't think you're going to be able to find Denzel, actually, old chap, just at the moment, because he's out. But I'll tell you what Denzel would say were he here. And so he does. And off goes the good brother, and he comes to the river, and in the river there's the ferryman, and he says to the ferryman, look, I didn't quite see Denzel, but I did find a wise old man in the forest, and he said what Denzel would say, and that is, did you ever do anything naughty in an early part of your life? And the ferryman says, well, I did a long time ago, but I'm much better now. Well, he says, in that case, the possibility is that someone's going to relieve you. Someone's going to take your place. And he says, well, if he does, I'll be very, very good. And he gets back to the house where all these people are, and he gives them advice, make a model of your dreams. And so they do. And the next morning, the one that's made a model of a toy shop, come and be a partner in my toy shop. On approval to the king. The one that's made a model of a bridal gown, there's a suitor. And very soon she gets married and lives happily ever after, of course. And the one that's made a model of her dream, which is to run the fastest in the land, has made a model of a trophy. She runs the race and is indeed the fastest in the land and wins her trophy. Off he goes, and they're all very, very... and he comes to the tree, and he digs deep next to the tree. He gets right to the roots of the tree, and he pulls out very good treasure. He picks the fruit, and the fruit is delicious. Because what was making the fruit bitter was the treasure, because treasure sometimes makes some things in nature bitter and some things sweet. So it makes his life sweet. Takes the fruit, which isn't very sweet. Takes the treasure. It's only 120 yards from where he lives. Isn't life very often like that? Very, very happy, he and his wife, and they live very, very happily. Now, there's one other detail of the story. The evil brother has... Denzel. Why don't you please tell me what she said? The evil... Well, wouldn't it be great if he did? Yes, okay, he did. Yes, he choked. There's just another variation of the story. He doesn't know what's going on outside because he's got silver outside the windows. So he goes along and he doesn't, just for example, just what happens if he doesn't choke? I think choking is brilliant. I do. This is another variation of the story which he goes to his brother and he says, what do you do? And the brother says, I went to see Denzel. And he goes down and he looks for... And he comes to the ferryman and he says to the ferryman, I'm looking for someone. And the ferryman says, Denzel. And he says, Denzel. The ferryman brings the boat over and gets out of the boat and helps him. Helps him into the boat, and when he gets into the boat, the evil brother... Did I tell you that the evil brother had windows and the outside of his windows were painted silver? Am I starting to repeat myself? We're almost there! He gets into the ferry and he says, now tell me, Denzel. And the ferryman says, I'm not Denzel. And the evil brother says, well, if you're not Denzel... No, get off. Push off! And so he does, and the evil brother has to go back and forth, forever until he's relieved. I've been in search, and by someone who could be you. I've been in search of the story. I've seen Hans Christian Andersen killed with kindness. I've seen the Brothers Grimm drowned. Scheherazade with her tongue cut out. Buddha's got a health food store. Hercules is running a gym. Oh, Jesus. Suddenly I find a strawberry. How delightful. Share it. Suddenly my son says, Dad, you know what? A story just came to me. I say, you're making it up. He says, and the story told me lots. I said, did the story tell you what the universe is in and what's going to happen to us? Looks far into the distance, deep within himself, and says, once upon
start in about 5 minutes if you want to go out and wait for a second.
Five minutes.